Good afternoon. I welcome this opportunity to audition for Ireland's Got Talent. I'm a bit worried about the judges just sitting to the left. So I'll begin by congratulating one of them and congratulating IPPN on taking this timely initiative, and then for having the good sense to involve their post-primary colleagues. I just threw that in because as a Scottish Director of Education, I like that phrase, post-primary. I do know the historical background to it, but I'm a strong believer in language, and with secondary head teacher colleagues in Scotland and England, I always used to rail when they would talk about their feeder primary schools and wondered how they would feel if they were thus described by FE colleges and universities. But it's a timely initiative. Just back from a seminar in the United States, and I do think perhaps in Ireland and certainly in other jurisdictions that I've worked in, we lag behind a bit in looking at the impact of the brain sciences in creating creative, inclusive and nurturing environments. I could echo a lot of what's been said already this morning. When I first started teaching, the inspectorate used to talk about tone of the school or the ethos. More recently, the debate has gone to be about the contribution of each component of the school community to the school culture. In Scotland, land of the basics, the 3 R's are, of course, reading, writing and arithmetic. We were never so good at spelling. Nowadays, the 3 R's, in my view, are rights, responsibilities, the two have got to go together, and crucially, respect. Respect being the most important and mutually beneficial. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity to visit Maine in the United States, the Institute of Global Ethics, and I met with the governor there, an independent. Following a school shooting, the state Congress had requested tighter school discipline, but the governor, a wise man, instead commissioned a piece of work whereby all school communities should have a debate at what their core values were. Exercises were undertaken among all interest groups to demonstrate the commonality of values and to agree and to actually do which values should be put above the school entrance. A process which I have often used since, and indeed for those of you that glance at Tuzla's corporate plan, you will see central to that is a set of values which was identified by this process. Research in this work would show that across the world, in different religions, in diverse groups and communities, that there is a key similarity. Different words are used. Sometimes certain cultures would shy away from love being one of the key values, but the values of truth, respect, fairness, compassion, and perhaps also the courage to implement these values are common. An exercise always worth doing, and in a fairly homogeneous group like this, if we did it, it'd be a big surprise if we didn't agree the values. So far, so good. That's the easy bit. The more difficult bit is to behave according to those values and to create a climate wherein we are all challenged to live up to these values. Policy, practice, and procedures, inspectorate, do of course matter, but values, behaviours, and relationships matter more. It was, of course, of interest to me when I went back and I was writing some papers for Scottish education that I noticed that the mace, which sits in Parliament and belonged to the original Scottish Parliament, we lost our sovereignty a lot sooner than you did. We did it over 300 years ago. And on the mace, it says integrity, wisdom, justice, and compassion. Some things are timeless. In the Scottish Authority, where I was Director of Education and then Director of Children's Services, by far the most effective post-primary school was the local denominational school, i.e. the Roman Catholic school, an inspirational school principal with a clear philosophy. For example, the boys in his award-winning football team had to participate in country dancing. Role models. He insisted in any show that was chosen that there were good parts for boys. Certainly I worked for a head teacher who would alarm, of a very popular school, who would alarm parents by saying, hands up those of you who want to send your boys to this school. And of course, lots of indulgent mothers put up their hands, and he would say, "You're wasting your time. This is a good school for girls." That story's maybe for another time. So I would suggest to this head teacher, Frank Lennon, that maybe he found it easier, to set the ethos of the school because there was a commonality of values among his parent group, whereas it's more difficult for school principals of multi-denominational schools. Frank would look at me and argue that perhaps that was just because they were still better hypocrites. On the back of that, I've often wanted to write an article in praise of hypocrisy. It's part of how we bring up our children. We need to tell them, even when we're not sure, it will be all right. We need to reassure them, and we need to set appropriate boundaries, which, if we're relatively successful parents, boundaries that we move as they grow older. It was interesting, the reference to the impact that divorce and marital breakup can have. And I think there needs to be greater emphasis to parents of their responsibilities during that process. Of the complaints and issues that reach my desk, it's often not just about the issues in the district court, but it's the civil court issues, the section 20s of warring parents, and parents who think that the child is now their friend and must become their ally, or about whom they will make cause against the other partner. And this is, quite frankly, fairly scandalous in terms of the effort made on parents. If parents' relationship's not working and they're going to divorce, children are not, part of this general battle. I'm, of course, an accidental social worker. Some would say not one at all, which would be correct. But I've been intrigued by the extent to which I've been accused of, in my time in Ireland, being obsessed solely with child protection issues rather than wider child welfare issues. Of course, fundamentally, my personal view, nothing could be further from the truth. It just so happened that child protection was the area most in need of attention when I arrived here 5 years ago. Fundamentally, I remain convinced that the most effective form of early intervention remains the properly resourced and inclusive school and the responsive health service. The most effective model for which I have ever worked or helped design is what the Americans would call the full service school, or in Scotland and Stirling, the award-winning New Communities School. I'm also highly supportive, therefore, of an initiative in Limerick, Lacala, where school, family support, early years and social work services are all accessible through the school campus on an extended day, extended year model. We must be careful about this. I think the model of integrated services can be a bit of a distraction. It is, however, essential that each of us know what our particular and valued contribution can be. And I do think social work's not always been good at defining its contribution. So the values of a school, the discipline of an organisation, shouldn't be in response to a crisis, but creating a culture where a crisis is unlikely. It's about an environment where children and young people can develop a sense of themselves through the projects that they take up in the world. It's encouraging them, as we've heard exemplified this morning, to show leadership and to be enterprising in sport, in the arts, in culture. How is it we manage to create a culture that we're so frightened for our own children and fearful of everybody else's? How can we create a culture that goes beyond children's representations in the media, where they are represented as victims or perpetrators? Yet, if we look at our communities, children make an enormous contribution to the community and are often the central focus as we approach the December time of year. I refuse to mention the C word in November. They're the centre of activity, community activity in sporting and cultural events. And then I was delighted to hear the reference to pupil councils and to pupil voice and to student democracy. Schools are of necessity autocratic. We need to be clear. There's no negotiation about this, but there is scope, and we want your views about that. We must nurture children to be effective and supportive members of their peer group. As we saw from the statistics, parents are by and large satisfied with the school and the academic performance of the school. What worries them is school as a social entity, vandalism, drugs, alcohol, and social media interventions. So we need to have school organisational structure that is prepared appropriately to be democratic, where the voice of the child is heard on matters that affect them and is treated with respect and is influential in policy. Emotional well-being is not a response to the crisis, but the creation of an environment where freedom, equality and democracy are celebrated in the democratic way of life. Schools cannot do it alone, so it's developing the capacity of each individual in a world where it's not just about the shared past of 1916, but the shared future of 2016 and that sense of involvement. So it's about effective services based on the effective support for the school, the effectiveness of society as a whole. Opportunities for children, not just the children who are loved, not just the children who are healthy, or as one school principal memorably put it to me, yes, Gordon, this is a good school for those who turn up. So it's not just about school policy, it's not just about child protection, but a community engagement that doesn't limit effectiveness to crisis intervention. And so in conclusion, what are the key challenges? These include ensuring every request for support for a child protection and welfare response receives a response which is efficient, effective and proportionate. TUSLA is still insufficiently responsive. We do also, and this event and the output from this event could be crucial, need to consider the issues of mental well-being and emotional health and whether or not the present structure encourages or inhibits a joined-up approach. There are too few shared goals, and accountability in Ireland is still unidisciplinary. Social workers are held to account for their inability to access services no better than the school or the family have been able to access services. So at present, the Child and Family Agency has welfare responsibilities for children up to a certain level. And then the Health Service Executive has illness responsibilities which begin at a level above that. And so we have created a no man's land which we should be populating with therapy services, psychology services and others to respond to schools, which is about mental and emotional well-being. So is there an integrated approach for schools to access advice and support regarding brain sciences, regarding opportunities for children and young people to be emotionally secure as they explore the world and take up its challenges? And it is interesting to note that even the Minister with responsibility in these matters, Catherine Lynch, has mentioned this several times in public, that maybe they got it wrong, maybe this needs to be looked at again. She may have been doing it for her own reasons to gildy up the psychiatric obsessed mental health profession, but that's another story. And is it time to seek fund holding for children and young people's services committees in order that particular initiatives, joint initiatives and joint accountability can be encouraged? And can that be done without duplication, without endless treacly meetings? Can it happen in a way which enables accountability but does not drown us in a surfeit of governance? So this debate is timely as the economy improves, as we face up to the challenges from the next generation, because surely they can do better than this one, and we seek to harness their truth and energy. I'm no longer allowed to say I'm a guest worker here as a proud grandparent of an Irish grandchild, but I do see Ireland as in a period of transition. Boom and bust, but it will never be the same again. The relationship between church and state, between church and society has changed. Period of transition. I'm just not quite clear what it is Ireland will decide to transit to. So hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. Hope gives us strength to live and try new things, even in challenging conditions. Vaclav Havel. Thank you.